My stepmom once told me I wasn't really part of the family and then kicked me out. A decade later, karma came back swinging. But let me take you back to where it all started. I was just 7 when my parents split. And yeah, it was messy like most divorces are. At the time, I didn't fully understand what was going on. All I knew was that mom and dad weren't together anymore, and suddenly I was bouncing back and forth between two houses, trying to figure out what normal was supposed to feel like again. Not long after that, Dad met Melanie. At first, she seemed okay. She'd smile when she talked to me, bring little snacks when she came over, and actually made it seem like she cared. I remember thinking, hey, maybe she's one of the good ones like the stepmoms in those feel-good TV shows. But wow, was I wrong. Less than a year after the divorce, my dad married her. It all happened so fast I barely had time to process the fact that my parents weren't a thing anymore. And suddenly, this new woman was in our lives, acting like she ran the place. At first, it was subtle stuff. She'd give me these strange looks if I tried to hang out with my dad, like I was intruding on her territory. Then, gradually, it got worse. It was like the moment she and Dad tied the knot, she flipped a switch. That friendly woman I thought she was? Gone. She didn't hide it either. She made it pretty clear I didn't fit into the picture she had in mind for her perfect little family. And the worst part? My dad didn't push back. He just let it happen, like he was so caught up in this shiny new life that he didn't notice how much I was being shoved aside. There's one moment that still stings when I think about it. Dad had promised we'd go out together, just the two of us. It had been a long time since we'd done something like that, and I was honestly counting the days. But right before we were supposed to go, Melanie suddenly had other plans for him, and just like that, I got left behind. And it wasn't a one-time thing either. After that, it was like clockwork. Anytime I wanted to do something with him, she'd come up with an excuse or pull him away, and he'd choose her. Every single time. Then came Isla, Melanie's baby. I didn't have any issues with her at first. She was just a baby. But Melanie used her as a way to keep me around while making me feel like an outsider. Whenever they wanted to go out or have a date night, guess who they dumped babysitting duty on? Yeah, me. They'd make these empty promises, you'll see your friends later, or we'll do something fun next time. Spoiler, next time never came. Plans would change, and I'd end up stuck at home while they were off enjoying themselves. It honestly felt like I was just their built-in sitter. They'd throw out fake compliments like, "You're such a great big sister to Isla," like that somehow made it okay. But I knew the truth. I wasn't a sister, I was a free service. And here's the part that really messed with me. Isla seemed to be their entire world. Every moment they were home revolved around her. They'd do crafts, play games, go places, and if I tried to join in, Melanie would wave me off with something like, "This is Mommy and Isla time," or tell me to go do something else. And Dad? He'd sit there and say nothing. Not one word. One time, they took Isla to a fair I had begged Dad to take me to for months. I found out about it after I got home from my grandma's house. Apparently, they didn't want to bother me and thought it would be better as a family outing. I remember standing there thinking, what am I then? A ghost? But what really tore me up was the look on my dad's face. He just stood there, silent. No apology, no explanation. Just silence. Like keeping Melanie happy was all that mattered now. That kind of stuff kept happening. Beach trips? I'd suddenly have chores. Movie nights? I was sent to grandma's. Family dinners out? They'd leave without me. Don't get me wrong, I love my grandma. She's one of the few people who actually made me feel like I mattered. But even I could see what was really going on. Melanie didn't want me there, and my dad didn't stop her. It got to the point where I'd just stay in my room when I visited. What was the point in trying? Every time I stepped out, Melanie would throw some passive-aggressive look or comment my way, like I was invading her space. And my dad, he either didn't notice or he didn't care enough to say anything. I think the moment that really broke something in me was when I tried to talk to him. I sat him down and told him how I felt, how I was being left out, how I was always babysitting Isla while missing out on everything else. And he just sighed and said something like, "Melanie's doing her best. You have to understand, it's not easy for her either." I wanted to scream. How is this about her? I was the one getting sidelined. But he didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. That was when it finally clicked. This wasn't going to get better. My dad had picked his new family, and I didn't fit into that picture. I was just an afterthought. So I stopped trying. I stopped asking to tag along on trips. I stopped knocking on their door when I was curious about what they were doing. And when they needed a sitter for Isla, I just said yes. Because arguing didn't change anything, it only made things worse. Staying quiet meant I could fly under the radar. At least that way, I didn't have to deal with Melanie's attitude. Looking back now, I can't tell if my dad really didn't see what was happening or if he just didn't care. Maybe he liked pretending our old life didn't exist. Maybe having me around was just too inconvenient for the picture-perfect setup he had with Melanie. Either way, the truth hurt. And once I accepted that, it made it easier to plan for the day I could finally walk away. By the time I turned 12, I already knew better than to count on promises. They were just words, empty ones. I understood exactly where I stood in that house. I was there to watch Isla stay quiet and disappear when they wanted family time. No one ever said that out loud, of course. Melanie would dress it up in sweet talk, say things like, "Isla needs her special bonding time," like I should understand. But I did understand. I wasn't part of the family. I was always the one left out. There's this one moment that really drove it home, made me realize how things were actually going to be. It was early summer, and my dad had promised we'd do something special, just the two of us. Said it was because I'd been doing well in school. I was beyond excited. It had been forever since we had any time together, just him and me. So when he mentioned going to an amusement park, my mind took off. I started picturing the rides I'd hit first, what snacks I'd beg him to buy, how it might finally feel like old times again. I mean, I was still just a kid. And I was starving for some actual father-daughter time. But then, a few days before we were supposed to go, I overheard Melanie on the phone. She was chatting with one of her friends, and I could tell she was planning something. When she brought up the amusement park, I actually got excited. I figured, okay, maybe she's helping put the trip together. Then I heard her say, "Yeah, it's just going to be the three of us." I wanted to be a special day for our little family. And just like that, my heart dropped. I remember just standing there, frozen in place, trying to wrap my head around what she meant. 3 people, Dad, Melanie, and Isla. No mention of me. Maybe I should have seen it coming. But that didn't stop it from hurting like hell. I went back to my room, trying to think of a way to talk to Dad about it, but I never got the chance. The next morning, Melanie came up to me with this big fake smile and said, "Hey, your grandma's been asking for you. She'd love to have you over this weekend." The whole thing reeked of a setup. I could see right through it. She just wanted me out of the house. But I didn't want to start a fight, so I packed my stuff and went. And to be fair, I do love my grandma. We had a decent weekend. But the whole time, all I could think about was my dad, Melanie, and Isla having the time of their lives at that amusement park without me. When I got back, it was like walking into a photo album. Isla was running around with one of those oversized stuffed animals you win from carnival games, and my dad was showing her photos from the day like it was the best day ever. They were glowing with joy, and I just stood there, completely invisible. Melanie noticed me standing off to the side and, in that sugary sweet tone she always used when she was being fake, said, "We didn't want to bother you while you were helping your grandma. We figured you'd enjoy the time with her." Yeah, right. They didn't want to bother me because they didn't want me around. That was the truth. And my dad? He just stood there nodding like it all made perfect sense. He didn't even ask me how I felt. Like my feelings were just irrelevant. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because deep down I already knew how it would go. They'd twist it around, make it sound like I was being ungrateful or dramatic. After that, It became a pattern. Anytime something fun came up, amusement parks, the beach, a simple movie night, I'd get sent off. Sometimes it was grandma's. Other times it was, why don't you go hang out with your friend this weekend? And if I ever tried to join, Melanie would have her lines ready. Oh, this is just a mommy and Isla day, or we've had this planned for a while, it wouldn't be fair to change it now. There was one weekend that stuck with me. They were talking about a beach day, laughing about it all week. I kept waiting for my dad to say, hey, why don't you come too? But of course, he never did. Instead, the day before they left, Melanie walked up and said, you know how much your grandma loves having you around. How about you stay with her for the weekend? I could have pushed back. But what would have been the point? I already knew how this game worked. So off I went. And surprise, surprise, when I got back, they were full of beach stories. Sandcastles, ice cream, boardwalk games. All the stuff I would have loved. I forced a smile, nodded along like I was fine, but inside, I was seething. It was obvious now. They didn't want me there. And my dad? He let it all happen like it was normal. Melanie always had a way of spinning it into something that sounded generous. Your grandma loves your company. I know how much you like your friends. Isla needs special memories too. But it was all just polished excuses. A way to keep me out of sight without actually saying it. And the part that stung the most? My dad acted like everything was perfectly okay. Like this was how families were supposed to function. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. They were planning a trip to this massive water park. I'd been begging to go there for years. I waited for anyone, to ask if I wanted to come. But once Melanie started going on about family bonding, I knew I was getting sidelined again. When she tried to send me off to grandma's, I finally said no. I looked her dead in the eye and said I wanted to go with them. She gave me this irritated look and said, well, we already bought tickets for 3. So I turned to my dad, hoping he'd step in, fix this, say something. But all he did was shrug like his hands were tied. That's when I snapped. I let it all out. How they always left me out, how they only noticed me when they needed someone to watch Isla. I said I was tired of being treated like a tool instead of part of the family. Melanie put on her shocked face, pretending she had no clue what I meant. Then she pulled out her usual script, how grandma appreciated my help, how they were just being thoughtful. But it was never about that. It was always about cutting me out. And my dad? He gave me the same useless response, as always, we'll talk about it later. But of course, we never did. We never talked about any of it. Every time I tried to speak up, it was like yelling into the wind. No matter how loud I got, it didn't matter. Eventually, I accepted the truth. Melanie was never going to let me in, and my dad was never going to fight for me. They had their little family bubble, and I wasn't part of it. I was just the leftover from Dad's old life, extra baggage they tolerated when they had to. So I gave up trying. It was just easier that way. Less heartache. Less hoping for something that was never gonna happen. By the time I turned 15, I was done chasing that picture of a happy blended family. I spent more and more time at grandma's, or locked away in my room, or with friends who actually wanted me around. Because the less I was there, the less they could use me or push me aside. And after a while, it felt like disappearing was the only way to survive it. Even with all the tiptoeing around and keeping to myself, it still felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells in that house. One weekend stands out more than the rest. It was one of those rare times when all my friends and I were actually free. We'd been planning it for weeks. The idea was simple. Hit the mall, catch a movie, grab some food, just be kids for a day. I was really looking forward to it. Those moments with my friends were about the only times I felt like a regular teenager. After spending so much time shut away at my dad's place, those outings meant everything. Then, like clockwork, Melanie showed up the night before with that fake, syrupy smile she always used when she was about to ask for something. Hey, she said, your dad and I have plans tomorrow, and we really need you to watch Isla. I just stared at her, trying to hold back my frustration. I told her I already had plans, that I'd been looking forward to this for weeks. She put on that surprised face, like it was news to her, but I knew better. She always knew. She kept tabs on everything. Then she let out one of her dramatic sighs and said, "Well, we don't have anyone else. I thought you'd want to help your family." That was the final straw for me. My blood was boiling. This wasn't about helping family. This was about being convenient. They didn't want to figure something else out. They just expected me to give up my life whenever it suited them. I told her straight up that it wasn't fair. I'd been missing out on so many things already, constantly stuck babysitting Isla. All I wanted was one day. Just one. Melanie's expression changed instantly. The sweet mask dropped, and the cold, annoyed version of her showed up. "You need to start stepping up more," she snapped. "This is your family now." That hit a nerve. I shot back that it didn't feel like family. Not when I was only included for chores and babysitting. Not when they left me out of everything fun and only remembered I existed when they needed something. She looked at me like I was being dramatic, like I was the unreasonable one. "We'll talk about this later with your dad," she said, like it was some warning. And I knew what that meant. It'd be another one of those guilt trip sessions where I got painted as the selfish, ungrateful kid. So I just walked away. The next morning, my phone lit up with texts from my friends asking when I'd be ready. And I felt awful. I ended up telling them I couldn't go, made up some excuse about a family emergency. I was too embarrassed to say the truth, that once again, I was stuck watching Isla because my dad and Melanie made last-minute plans. I could tell some of my friends were irritated. And honestly, who could blame them? I'd bailed too many times already. I started getting the feeling they'd stop inviting me altogether. Later that day, my dad finally came home. And almost immediately, Melanie pulled me into the kitchen for one of her family discussions. My dad looked exhausted, like he already knew what was coming and wanted no part of it. Melanie launched into her speech about responsibility and pulling my weight. She made it sound like I was this lazy kid who didn't do anything around the house. Which was a total joke, because I did way more than anyone gave me credit for. When she finished, my dad just nodded and mumbled, "She's right. We all have to work together." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at him, hurt and angry all at once. I asked, "When's the last time we did anything as a family? Every time something fun happens, I'm left out. I'm only here to babysit Isla when it's convenient." He didn't have much to say. Just something vague about how life was busy and how raising a family takes effort from everyone. At that point, it felt like I was talking to a brick wall. No matter what I said, he was always going to back Melanie. That's when it really hit me, this wasn't just on her. My dad was part of the problem too. He let her treat me like an outsider. He saw it happening and chose to ignore it. He kept pretending everything was fine, even though it was tearing me up inside. That realization crushed me, because deep down I'd still been holding on to this tiny hope that maybe he'd step in. That maybe he still cared enough to fight for me. But he didn't. And once I saw that clearly, everything changed. After that, I stopped putting up a fight. No more arguments, no more asking to be included. I just did what they wanted. If they needed a sitter, I did it. If they told me to pack my stuff and go to grandma's, I did that too. It was easier to just go with it than to speak up and feel even more alone. I started pulling away more and more. Spent as much time as I could at my grandma's or with my mom whenever I had the chance. I just didn't want to be in that house anymore. It felt like I was just a shadow, floating through the halls, only noticed when something needed to be done. Otherwise, I might as well not have existed. And the strange part? The more I pulled away, the less they even seemed to care. They kept going on with their lives, taking trips, going out to eat, doing fun stuff with Isla. And I'd just watch from a distance, pretending it didn't hurt. But it did. It hurt a lot. The breaking point came on my birthday. Now, I wasn't expecting much, not anymore, but it still stung when the day came and went without anything special. Melanie baked a small cake, tossed on a few candles, and they sang happy birthday like they were checking it off a list. I kept hoping maybe Dad would have something planned. Maybe just a trip to grab ice cream. Anything. But no. The next day, they went out again, just the three of them. And when they came back, it was obvious they'd been at the arcade. Isla was running around the living room, showing off her prizes, laughing like she'd just had the best day ever. And me? I was in my room, like always, pretending I didn't care. But I did. That was the moment I made my decision. I was done. Done trying to be part of their version of a family. If they didn't want me, then fine. I'd stop trying to force my way in. From then on, I focused on school. I made time for friends whenever I could. And I started quietly planning my way out. It was clear I'd never belong in that house. So why keep fighting for a place they never intended to give me? By the time I hit 17, all I could think about was getting out for good. I'd been counting down the days, and the moment finally came. My mom had asked me more than once if I wanted to live with her full-time. And after everything with Melanie and my dad, it wasn't even a hard choice. Honestly, it felt like the only way I'd ever get a sliver of peace. My mom and I had talked about me moving in before, but I always kept putting it off. I think part of me was still clinging to this tiny hope that maybe, just maybe, my dad would finally step up and act like a real parent. But after years of being pushed aside, treated like a live-in babysitter, I knew nothing was going to change. Melanie would always come first, and I'd always be the leftover kid who didn't fit into their picture-perfect life. So eventually, I said yes to my mom's offer. This time, for real. I planned everything carefully. I didn't want it to explode into some big argument. I wasn't looking for drama. I just needed to be honest and get it over with. I waited for one of those rare quiet moments when it was just me and my dad at home. No Melanie hovering around, no distractions. Just the two of us. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my hands trembling a little, heart pounding. I looked him in the eye and told him I wanted to live with Mom full-time. I said I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. That Melanie had been shutting me out for years, that I was tired of being treated like the help instead of his kid. He didn't say anything at first, just stared down at the table. Then, finally, he looked up and said, "Melanie's been trying her best, trying to make this work." Like that made it all okay. Like that erased everything. I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd just laid out, that was what he had to say? It felt like he hadn't heard a word. I tried again. I told him it wasn't fair, how I'd been left out of every fun moment, how I was only needed when there was a favor to be done. I laid it all out, hoping something would finally click. But all he did was sigh and say, "You're being too sensitive. Melanie wants to include you. You just don't see it." And that was it. That's when it really hit me. He was never going to get it. He wasn't just blind to what was happening. He didn't want to see it. No matter how loud I got or how clearly I spelled it out, he was always going to take her side. He was so lost in his new little world with Melanie and Isla, he couldn't even see that he was losing me in the process. Weirdly enough, once I realized that, I felt this strange wave of peace. Like the guilt that had been weighing me down finally let go. So I told him I'd already talked to Mom about moving out. And he didn't even fight me on it. He just nodded, like he'd made peace with it already. "If that's what you want," he said, "then I won't stop you." No argument. No second thoughts. Just go. And maybe that was the worst part. I packed up that same night. Melanie wasn't home, which was honestly a blessing. I didn't want one of her fake, teary goodbyes or guilt trips. I just wanted out. I stuffed my clothes and things into boxes and bags, moving as fast as I could. The whole time, I half expected my dad to come check on me, maybe say something, ask me to stay. But he never did. My mom pulled up out front, and I carried everything out to her car. When I came back in for the last time to say goodbye, he was standing in the hallway, awkward and quiet, like he didn't know what to say. He gave me a hug, but it felt like one of those stiff hugs you give a stranger at a family reunion. Then he said, Take care of yourself, okay? I just nodded. Yeah, you too. It was short, hollow, and that was that. Part of me had hoped he'd stop me, that he'd suddenly realize what he was losing and say something that mattered. But he didn't. He let me go without a fight. Melanie still wasn't back when we pulled away from the house. I didn't know if she even knew I was leaving, and honestly, I didn't care. I was done trying to squeeze myself into her version of family. As we drove away, I kept looking back at the house. It was the place I grew up in, sure, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It hadn't in a long time. Moving in with my mom felt like finally coming up for air after being underwater for years. There were no conditions, no expectations. She didn't want anything from me except for me to be okay. And that alone made everything feel lighter. She didn't force me to talk about it all right away. She just let me settle in, which I appreciated more than I can say. But eventually we had the talk. I told her everything, how Melanie had made me feel like an outsider, how Dad never stood up for me, how I always felt like a burden in my own home. She didn't get mad at me, she got mad for me. She was furious at my dad for letting it all happen. And that made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Like maybe I had every right to feel the way I did. She told me I was welcome there, no questions asked. No hoops to jump through. No guilt. Just home. And it was the first time in forever that something actually felt normal. I hadn't realized how much I missed that feeling. In those first few weeks, I kept waiting for my dad to reach out. A call, a text, anything. But there was nothing. Silence. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. But it still hurt. Deep down, I'd hoped me leaving might finally open his eyes. That maybe it'd be the wake-up call he needed. But it wasn't. It was like I'd disappeared and they didn't even notice. Still, as hard as that truth was to swallow, I knew I'd made the right choice. I couldn't keep sitting around hoping my dad would finally be the father I needed him to be. I had my own life to live, and I deserved to be somewhere I felt wanted. Living with my mom wasn't just about escaping that house. It was about finally finding a place where I didn't have to prove my worth. Where I didn't have to earn love or attention. It was weird at first, adjusting to a new rhythm. But it was a good kind of weird. I focused on school, hung out with my friends more, picked up a part-time job. I started building something that was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to constantly look over my shoulder, waiting to be pushed aside. Things finally started making sense. Looking back now, I don't regret a single thing. Leaving was the best decision I ever made. I'm sure my dad and Melanie have their own version of the story, their own way of spinning things. But I know the truth, and I'm done trying to fix it or get them to see my side. I did what I had to do to survive, and I'm better off because of it. Since moving in with my mom, life has finally started to feel normal again. And after everything, that's more than enough. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally exhale. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't walking on eggshells or forcing a smile so I wouldn't rock the boat. I wasn't the babysitter. I wasn't the afterthought. I wasn't the spare kid in someone else's family fantasy. I was just me, and that was enough. My mom gave me space when I needed it, but she was always there if I wanted to talk. She didn't push, didn't pry, just let me be. Honestly, that was exactly what I needed. A few months passed, and I settled into a rhythm. I was doing online classes and keeping up with my grades. I even landed a part-time job at a local store, not just for the paycheck, but because it gave me something of my own. My friends and I were finally hanging out more too, now that I wasn't constantly bailing last minute. For the first time in forever, I was living life on my own terms. Then one night, everything took a weird turn. My mom and I had gone out for dinner, nothing fancy, just our usual spot. And while we were there, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in ages, Ethan. He was the son of one of my dad's old buddies. We used to hang out all the time when our parents got together. He was always cool to me, even back when everything was falling apart at my dad's. Turns out he'd moved away for college, but was back in town for a bit. We caught up, shared a few laughs. Then he asked something that made me freeze up a little. So, how come I haven't seen you at your dad's in forever? I took a breath and gave him the short version. I told him I'd moved in with my mom full-time. I didn't spill all the details, just said things had been tough with Melanie and it was better this way. He looked genuinely surprised. Wait, really? That's not what your dad and Melanie said. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He told me that they'd been telling people my mom manipulated the courts into getting full custody. That she basically took me. Like I had no say in the matter. I nearly laughed out loud right there at the table. Of course they'd spin it like that. It was so typical, paint themselves as the victims and blame my mom for everything, just so they didn't have to admit the truth. I felt this mix of anger and disbelief, but also this calm clarity. That was it. I wasn't going to let them keep rewriting my story to fit their narrative. So I told Ethan everything. Not the watered-down version, the real story. I told him I chose to leave. I told him how I was treated like a nanny, how I was always excluded from anything fun or important, how Melanie made sure I never felt like I belonged. I didn't hold back. He listened the whole time, eyes wide. When I finished, he just shook his head and said, "Wow. I had no idea. I really thought they were doing their best." And that right there, that was the problem. They were so good at putting on a show. So good at acting like the perfect family when people were watching. But once the door shut, different story entirely. Even though it was just one person telling, Ethan felt good. Like I was finally reclaiming my truth. A few days later, I started getting messages. People I hadn't heard from in years, some of my dad's old friends, were texting me, asking if I was okay. Turns out Ethan had told his parents, who told their friends, and before long the whole social circle knew the truth. And let's just say, Dad and Melanie weren't thrilled. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I usually ignore those, but something made me answer. It was Melanie. Guess she changed her number after I blocked the old one. She started off with this fake sweet tone, pretending she missed me, said she'd been so worried. But it didn't take long before she got to the point. "We need to talk about these rumors," she said, her voice suddenly a little sharper. "They're making things really difficult for us." I blinked. "Rumors? These aren't rumors," I told her flatly. "They're just facts." I told someone what actually happened. She tried to play the guilt card, of course. Said I was making things harder for Isla, that their friends were treating them differently now. Then she said the line that made my stomach turn. "You're a good daughter. We know you'll do the right thing for your family." My family? They'd made it crystal clear a long time ago that I wasn't family, not when it mattered. Not when it was time for vacations, or parties, or anything remotely fun. I was just the built-in babysitter. But now that the spotlight was on them and their reputation was cracking, suddenly I was family again? I told her exactly how I felt. "You and Dad made your choices. Don't expect me to fix something I was never included in to begin with." She didn't like that. She tried to spin it back around, bringing up Isla again, how she was hurt, how she didn't understand why her friends were ignoring her now. The same routine as always, make me feel like it's my job to carry their mess. But this time, I wasn't playing along. "Isla isn't my responsibility," I said. "You both made it clear I didn't belong. So don't expect me to show up now just because it's convenient." She kept talking, but I was done. I hung up. Not long after, I started getting messages from relatives, people who had been silent for years suddenly popping up to tell me I needed to help the family. That Isla didn't deserve to suffer. Where were they when I was crying myself to sleep? When I was left behind while they all went to the amusement park? When I was doing chores instead of being included? They weren't there then. So why did they think they had the right to demand anything now? Here's the thing. I feel for Isla. I really do. She's just a kid. But she's not my kid. And I'm not going to let them emotionally blackmail me into cleaning up after their choices. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. These days, I'm focused on my life. My own peace. My own goals. My dad and Melanie can deal with the fallout from their actions. They had every chance to treat me like family, and they threw it away. I'm not going to spend another second trying to repair something they broke and never wanted to fix. It's not my job to pick up the pieces of a relationship they shattered. And I finally understand that's not on me.